Good morning. Thank you for joining us on such short notice. Representative Steckloff, Senator Moss, and I represent the entirety of the Jewish caucus of the Michigan Legislature. And we are here today not just as Michigan legislators, but also as Jews. Jews who are devastated, horrified, grieved, and outraged beyond measure by what must now only be described as a crisis of anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish violence in the United States. Jews gunned down outside the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. Jews set on fire in an American city in 2025. I can hardly believe the words that I am saying. Over the past decade and a half, American Jews have watched our vibrant synagogues congeal into fortresses, the anxiety that our sanctuaries or Sunday schools could be the next target for a gunman or a terrorist pervades Jewish communities across Michigan. Over the past decade and a half, American Jews have watched as countless political figures of every ideological stripe have trafficked in anti-Semitism or pretended not to see anti-Semitism or have actively excused or justified anti-Semitism. All while Jews and Jewish institutions have been jeered and stalked and threatened and vandalized and beaten and shot and burned and killed. We were told that very fine people on both sides wasn't a dog whistle of support from the most powerful man on earth to white supremacists who view Jews as a racial pollutant on American society. We were told that globalize the Intifada was just a call for visibility of the plight of Palestinians and not a very open and obvious call for violence against Jews anywhere and everywhere. We were told that the world's richest man making a Nazi salute was really just an awkward gesture, mere weeks before that same man engaged in Holocaust denial. We were told that the encampments on college campuses were beacons of beautiful activism, not hotbeds of rampant anti-Jewish racism buttressed by funding from Iran and disinformation on TikTok. We were told that it was just anti-Zionism, as if somehow opposing the internationally recognized legal right of political self-determination and sovereignty for Jews and only Jews is somehow not an inherently anti-Jewish conceit. We were told that the worst ever massacre of Jews since the Holocaust on October 7th was justified, that it never happened, or that it should happen again, which one was it? I'm sorry, that's all of it. We were told that the Christian Zionists are our friends and allies, and not the very same people working ceaselessly to force all Americans to adopt their religious beliefs by remaking American law in the image of one specific vision of one religious faith. We were told that we must stand against all forms of hate, apparently because it is uncouth to denounce anti-Jewish racism in the particular, unless we also acknowledge all other forms of hatred, prejudice, and discrimination, because it is somehow less legitimate to talk distinctly about Jews as a minority group needing and deserving of social, cultural, and political solidarity. Time and again, American Jews have been told not to believe our eyes or our ears as individuals and movements hostile to our very existence have grown in stature, support, and power in the United States. 80 years after we defeated Nazi Germany, anti-Jewish hatred has dug its claws into the American people, right, left, and center. This is a wake-up call. Last session, I sponsored the first updates to Michigan's hate crime laws in nearly 40 years with the Michigan Hate Crime Act and the Institutional Desecration Act. Today, I am taking the next step by introducing the Michigan Antisemitism Protection Act, or MAPA. MAPA would enshrine a gold standard definition of anti-Semitism within the Elliot-Larsen Civil Rights Act. If adopted, the standard would assist relevant state authorities, agencies, and institutions to better identify and elevate potential cases of illegal discrimination against Jews in Michigan. As with the entirety of the Elliot-Larsen Civil Rights Act, the standard adopted would only apply to discriminatory conduct, not constitutionally protected free speech, nor criminal acts or violent acts. When it comes to this MAPA bill, or even the new hate crime laws, one thing is certain: they are not a cure-all. Anti-Jewish racism, like all racism, is a societal ill and a public health problem that we need to tackle as such, and neither new laws nor the criminal justice system can fully substitute for that work. So what can we actually do? What we can do is tackle anti-Jewish racism when it dovetails with a criminal act. What we can do is improve Michigan's tools to respond to hate and extremism, pursue justice and accountability. What we can do is train parents, teachers, coaches, and peers to recognize the signs of youth radicalization and intervene. What we can do is fund programs that deter hate and targeted violence in the first place. What we can do is invest in nurturing schools, safe neighborhoods, fulfilling jobs, and meaningful social outlets that provide purpose, belonging, and community to all Michiganders. That's why this year, I have partnered with Peril, the Polarization and Extremism Research and Innovation Laboratory at American University, to bring data-driven, research-based toolkits, trainings, and curricula on preventing hate, targeted violence, radicalization, and misinformation by using a public health approach. Peril's prevention resources are available for free to the public, and I would like to see every school district in Michigan implement their award-winning K-5 digital literacy curriculum that equips our youngest students with the skills to be resilient against propaganda and misinformation. As part of this work, I will also seek Governor Whitmer's support to create a commission on targeted violence prevention within the executive branch, similar to those that exist in other states, to bring together public and mental health professionals, law enforcement, intelligence professionals, faith leaders, education, sports, and academia professionals, and establish a statewide strategy for preventing targeted violence here in the state of Michigan. The crisis of anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish violence we face did not arrive overnight. It arrived through the passivity and silence of far too many individuals and institutions who would never tolerate this kind of racism and violence targeting their own community. I want to emphasize this point. While hate speech isn't criminal, it's also much more than just offensive. The relationship between hate speech and targeted violence is cause and effect. The more anti-Jewish hate speech is normalized and mainstreamed, the easier it becomes for more people to view all Jews collectively as legitimate targets for violence. That means condemning and marginalizing anti-Semitic rhetoric literally acts prophylactically to counter violence. Conversely, when people are silent or acquiescent in response to anti-Jewish racism, or worse, feed anti-Semitic conspiracies, they are complicit in establishing a permission structure for further violence against Jewish communities. We are not doomed to failure. There are tangible steps we can take here in Michigan to arrest this crisis of anti-Semitism. 1. Passing the Michigan Antisemitism Protection Act. 2. Encouraging Michigan schools to begin teaching skills to ensure students are resilient to propaganda and misinformation, such as through the Polarization Extremism Research and Innovation Lab. 3. Establishing an executive commission on targeted violence prevention and developing a statewide strategy. And 4, and most importantly, for every person of conscience to stand up, speak out, and call out hateful anti-Jewish rhetoric, conspiracies, and racism, to once more make anti-Jewish racism intolerable in mainstream America. Indeed, rooting out hate, anti-Semitism, and extremism society and protecting at-risk youth from this tech-driven radicalization requires not just a whole-of-government effort, but a whole-of-society effort too. It is incumbent upon each of us, individually and collectively, to cultivate spaces among our families, our friends, our colleagues, and our neighbors where anti-Semitism, conspiracies, and hate have no purchase. We cannot and must not fail. Thank you, and I will now turn it over to Representative Steckloff.
Thank you, Representative Arbit. I'm here to talk about misinformation and where we've gotten to where we are today. A few years ago, when Kanye West went off on his rant going about DEFCON 3 on Jews, this is the first time we've seen the rise in anti-Semitism. We haven't seen this rise since the 1930s. And let me make something very clear about misinformation. There are only 15 million Jews in the entire world. 15 million Jews in the entire world. We don't even make up a 0.5% of the population of this world. We can't do this alone. Jewish hate cannot be just spoken about by our Jewish individuals. The rise in hate has so much information that is associated with it. The term Zionism has been hijacked. The term from the river to the sea has been hijacked. The term globalize the intifada has been weaponized. We're seeing across this country that American Jews are being targeted. American Jews have nothing to do with what we are seeing overseas. When half the Israeli population is rising up and marching in the street against Netanyahu, when Palestinians are marching in the street and rising up against Hamas, these are the important stories that must be spoken about. While we have 3 members of the Jewish Legislative Caucus, as Jews, we always joke about how with 3 Jewish members, we could have 40 different opinions. Because we're not just one thought, we're not just one being, and we're being characterized as that. A few weeks ago in the Elections Integrity Committee, we saw the trope that Jews run the world. In the Election Integrity Committee, we had someone testify about how Jews were the reason for this some sort of misinformation and stealing of the election. This is the stuff we need to continue to fight against. These are the tropes that we need to continue to fight against. And I don't know if this is something that we need to come together and have an education with our population, but we cannot continue to hate American Jews because of what's going on overseas. Every single member up here has spoken against the atrocities that we've seen against the Palestinian people. We've stood up here and spoken against the atrocities we saw on October 7th. But we are American, and that's why we're here today. Every single one of us in the Jewish caucus has received a call from the FBI with credible threats to our life. Currently, right now at home, I have police detail on my home. This is where we're at. With 15 million Jews across this entire world, we cannot do it alone. And I'm calling upon our allies. I'm calling upon Americans to stand up and protect our Jewish population. And now I want to turn it over to Senator Jeremy Moss.
Thank you and good morning. And I appreciate everyone who is here and giving attention to this important discussion that we're trying to drive. We're trying to amplify our voices in this really harrowing moment of rising anti-Semitism. We are in an era of extremism, political extremism, and political extremism is never good for the Jews. We are getting squeezed from both sides of the extreme. And I think many of us can recognize and comprehend anti-Semitism on the far right. White nationalists, neo-Nazis, the tiki torches at Charlottesville. But when we talk about anti-Semitism from the far left, as we recognize it, we're faced with anti-Semitic aggression twice. First, the instance of hate itself, and second, the denial that it's even happening. In this moment, we must listen to Jewish voices in distress before it is too late. And many of us have been sounding this alarm for a very long time. October 7th and the successive horrific war has absolutely bred anti-Semitism here at home. I think all decent people pray for peace, the release of hostages, the end of Hamas terror, the de-escalation of violence, a path for 2 states to exist without conflict. I join that peace-seeking movement, but I cannot join a movement with people who say globalize the intifada or end Zionists or Jews go back to Poland. Those are not rallying cries for peace. And indeed, those are the phrases that last year led to the desecration and vandalism of a Jewish-owned business, a Jewish home, and the Jewish Federation building in my district. This is harassment, intimidation, and incitement of violence against Jews. This is anti-Semitism. But sadly, we have felt that it's Jewish voices alone that are calling this out. And then we get lectured that our fears are unfounded Our warnings are unwarranted, and even worse, in the most extreme circumstances, that these tactics are justified. Has been mentioned, the reality is that there are only 15 million Jews in the world. So there are 10 million people in Michigan and 15 million Jews in the world. So there are a Michigan and a half worth of Jews in the world. And when a TikTok video spreading anti-Semitic lies and conspiracy theories gets 16 million views, there are not enough Jews alive today to be able to combat it. Without allies standing up, this bigotry goes unchecked. And now it has escalated to real acts of violence. The same words that have been spray painted on buildings in Oakland County were the final words heard by young diplomats in D.C. before they were shot to death. The final words heard before Jewish senior citizens, including a survivor of the Holocaust, were set on fire. Enough is enough. I served in this legislature in 2017 when we condemned Charlottesville with fervor. It was obvious that if you're at a rally on the right and Nazis show up, you're at a Nazi rally. Similarly, any sort of political protest on the left should not be comfortable aligning with an anti-Semitic fringe. It is a tragedy that assault and death has prompted more voices to join in this rebuke, but it has. And it will take all voices to snuff out anti-Semitism across the political spectrum. And that's why we're here.
We're happy to take questions.
I'm curious, so you talked about the radicalization of youth. Is that something you've seen becoming more common recently?
I think there's no question about that. I think especially escalated and exacerbated by TikTok, which we know, there are pros and cons in terms of the, a potential ban on TikTok, which was passed by Congress and defied by the president. But be that as it may, we know that foreign countries with certain ideological motives are pumping out propaganda. And that's part of why we need to educate our youth with the skills and impart them with the skills to be resilient and resistant to propaganda, misinformation, and disinformation. And that's work that we can do here in Michigan.
What are some of the things people can do at home if you've got a child and you want to make sure that they don't fall victim to this?
Well, that's a good question. There's resources. I would send parents and teachers and coaches and mentors to perilresearch.com. That's the organization that works on these issues and works on provable strategies and how to implement those strategies to make sure that our youth are resilient to propaganda, misinformation, and radicalization. And they have toolkits that are available online. And I would, direct your viewers to perilresearch.com. Any other questions?
Can you talk a little bit more about the pattern of anti-Semitism and why it makes anti-Semitism especially dangerous?
Well, the thing about anti-Semitism, and feel free to jump in here, is that it's amorphous. It's something that morphs over time and place through centuries, through millennia, actually, and can take on different ideological valences depending on who the speaker is, who the messenger is, and what the purpose is. But I think anti-Semitism is often, I think, very usefully understood as a conspiracy theory that basically alleges Jews to have too much power. And if you think about it, it sort of operates differently on the right than the left, at least contemporarily. It is something where the left views, it's, that octopus across the globe, capitalism and the big fat cats and the corporate greed and, Jews control Hollywood and Jews control the media and Jews control this and that. And they need to be taken down a peg, right? And then on the right, it's that Jews are a racial pollutant. They are not white, according to the white nationalist, white supremacist viewpoint, which is the far right, is that Jews are a racial irritant of society and need to be extirpated, and that is specifically hearkening back to Nazi ideology. But undergirding both of that. both the right and the left is the idea that Jews need to be taken down a peg. And now on the left, I think the blind side is really real because not all Jews are white. We have black Jews, we have brown Jews, we have Jews from all across the world. Almost every civilization that has ever existed has had Jewish communities. I was in India in March, and I did a bunch of Jewish tours, and the tours were by Indian Jews, and they looked Indian because they were Indian, but they were also Jewish. And I think the left has a real blind spot in. And I've said this for years, is that what the left needs to understand is that Jews are just as worthy of the solidarity that the left extends to all other marginalized communities, and perhaps even right now more so. And that, I think, has its roots in phenotype, right? The assumption that all Jews are white, and that white people are privileged, and that white people are the sort of power structure that we need to get away from, leads to Jews being in the crosshairs a lot. And I think the problem is that, especially right now with what is going on in the Middle East, it's been taken one step further to where I think violence against Jews has been actually justified, rhetorically, particularly. But these are the trends that we're seeing. Does anyone have anything to add?
I just wanted to jump in about education and about that question. The Holocaust Memorial is located in my district. Michigan had the first Holocaust Memorial in this country. Well, LA claims to have it, but they just had a poll. So we're going to focus on Michigan. In 1984, the Holocaust Memorial was created at the JCC. And it was a very special memorial because this was created by Holocaust survivors. So the storytelling of Holocaust survivors is what propelled the Holocaust Memorial here in Michigan. The Holocaust Memorial has changed. It just received and just went through in a complete renovation because we're losing our Holocaust survivors. We're losing those direct storytellers, and now it's created through the lens of the next generation. And this memorial focuses on how anti-Semitism started, not only in Europe, but how it was perpetuated here in Michigan. And I know Senator Moss has spoken about how boats have been turned away from the United States, and we're literally looking into the democracy of the United States as they were turned away during the Holocaust. If you go to the memorial, you talk about how Henry Ford used to have a memo that he used to put in every vehicle that was sold about how the Jews continue to run the world. So I implore each and every one of you to come to the Holocaust Memorial because it's very eye-opening about how Jewish hate and the propaganda really started and how it continues to be very reflective in many of the things you're seeing today.
You've said it all.
I do have one more question. So you talked about how there's anti-Semitism on both sides. Do you think that the fact that you see anti-Semitism on both sides, does it feed off each other in a way, especially maybe on social media?
Well, I certainly think that there is a bit of a partisan boomerang when it comes to anti-Semitism, in that once it becomes a partisan issue, the other side either doesn't have an interest in fighting it. And to be honest, I said I wasn't going to say this, but I'm going to say this. I don't think either party gets a passing grade here when it comes to fighting anti-Semitism. And so I hope that can actually cause people to disarm on this issue and say, well, actually, there is a lot of room for both parties to do a lot better on this issue. I could talk a blue streak on the merits and demerits of both parties, and there are merits and demerits to both in terms of the approach or lack thereof. But I would just say my message is, the Democratic Party is going to continue to exist in the United States. The Republican Party is going to continue to exist in the United States. Jewish people will continue to exist in the United States. And I would like to see both parties put a veritable good faith effort to improving what they are doing in terms of standing up for the Jewish communities across America. And that means actual, active solidarity, and not just for the purpose of a press conference or scoring political points on the other party when it's perceived to be something that can be taken advantage of. We need real solidarity. We need real action. And I think what we're seeing right now is actually the chickens coming home to roost of politicians only play acting at fighting anti-Semitism and not actually doing anything about it.
You're not seeing that real action right now?
No, I'm not. I'm seeing a lot of play acting.
I had a quick question about the law to amend IHRA. So there are protections in there for religion
Yep.
and others. How would this differ, or why is it necessary to have this?
Well, I think one of the things that I think we all understand that I think is quite important is that, and Elena asked the question as well, is that anti-Semitism is sometimes hard to define and it's sometimes hard to describe. And it's not always intuitive for people who haven't had the education to understand what it looks like, what it sounds like, and how it manifests. And having a standardized definition that has been adopted by the U.S. State Department, I think by the United Nations, but don't quote me on that, but I know some UN agencies, I think the OSCE, and other national and subnational institutions, having that in Michigan law, I think would be helpful in terms of helping our state agencies, our particularly higher education, be able to assess and identify what is and what isn't prohibited discrimination against Jews. I think it's particularly illustrative. Like let's take for example the rhetoric around like globalists and globalist elites and all that. There are times and places in which that is a distinct anti-Semitic dog whistle, a dog whistle against Jews. And for people who don't understand the history, and I wouldn't expect any authority who is going to be investigating these claims to be an expert in these manifestations of anti-Semitism, to be able to have a sort of chart that says this is how this can look, I think is very helpful in helping us identify. You can't fight something that you can't identify, right? And it's a little bit like nailing Jello to the wall sometimes. And if we have this tool in law, I believe that we will strengthen our ability to fight it.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about, you mentioned it earlier in your comments, sort of the relationship between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. Do you see one as the veil for the other? Do you see them as distinct?
I've had a little bit of an evolution on this because I used to sort of, give a benefit of the doubt that, people could be, based on the historical inequities of the founding of the State of Israel, could say, well, I don't agree with Israel. But the reality is the right to political sovereignty and the right to political self-determination is a core principle of international law. And when a community decides that it would like to have political sovereignty, there are processes and mechanisms in place under international law in which that is an accepted right. And oftentimes political recognition of emergent states is founded on that principle of self-determination for peoples, particularly oppressed peoples. This emerged after World War I, the breakup of the Austro-Hungarian Empire as well as the Ottoman Empire. And I think what's really important to understand is that when people say that they are anti-Zionist, when they say that Jews don't have the right to political self-determination, what we mean by political self-determination means sovereignty in the form of a nation state, the state of Israel. What they are saying is that Jews do not have the right to rule themselves. But the corollary of that is that how many other groups are allowed to rule themselves? And are you also opposing the nation state of Japan? Are you also opposing the existence of France for the French? Are you also opposing the nation, Turkey, the Republic of Turkey, which is the Turkish nation state? Of course, there are minorities in all of these communities, but it is a widely accepted fact that there are nation states for specific peoples. And when they oppose Zionism on its face because they don't want Jews to have a state, but they don't also in the same breath. I mean, listen, anti-Zionism, you can have anti-Zionism without anti-Semitism in laboratory conditions. In laboratory conditions where you're saying, I don't agree with any states that are predicated on ethnic nationality, but that's never how it happens in real life. And so I do believe that most 99% of anti-Zionism is ipso facto anti-Semitism.
And let's talk about when so-called anti-Zionism becomes anti-Semitism. The only reason you know the backgrounds of the two killed Israeli diplomats is because they're dead. You know what? You did not know anything about them when they were alive, and neither did the shooter. The shooter went to the Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. to protest Israel by killing people who were at the Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. This horrific incident just the other ladies who walk every Sunday never have anti-Palestinian rhetoric, never have outcries or outward protests. They walk peacefully because there are still 58 remaining hostages in Gaza some 600 days later. And they were set on fire in the name of what's going on in a war, 4,000 or 5,000 miles away. That's where anti-Zionism targets Jews where they stand. And this is exactly what we're trying to express is anti-Semitism. The fact that Jews where they exist will always be persistent and consistent targets for a horrific war that's going on in the Middle East is textbook anti-Semitism. And it was very aggravating as we were on the steps of the Goodman Acker law firm trying to explain and express that. And we were kind of gaslit. Well, this is a protest about the war. But it's targeting American Jews here at home and making us responsible for every single political decision that's made in carrying out this war. Regardless, Jews should not be targets and disproportionately be on the receiving end of violence for any reason. Just like any community should not be a disproportionate target for any issue that's going on in the world. This is when anti-Zionism does bleed into anti-Semitism here at home.
Okay, thank you.
Thank